A neuroscientist and a healer? What an amazing combination. Welcome to the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Dupree, scouring the globe to bring you stories of courage, passion, and resilience. If I could sum up this podcast into one word, I would use empathy. Now let's get inspired. Welcome to the third episode of the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I am, of course, your host, Brett Dupree. I am so excited to record episode 3 today. It is a Thursday, so it's been 4 days after I recorded my last podcast, which I believe was on Sunday. Time is moving slow and fast at the same time, which I'm saying weird for some reason. The important thing is, in my life right now, I am taking on a lot. I am starting this podcast, which takes a lot of work, even though Acuity makes scheduling part so much easier. Check out pod.joyousexpansion.com for my affiliate link on that. I freaking love that program. Anyway, I'm starting this podcast, which is causing me a little bit of stress because this takes up time. Not only that, I am stepping up in my Toastmaster life. I am one award away from being what is called a distinguished Toastmaster. For the people who don't know, a distinguished Toastmaster is what you get when you completed our educational track in Toastmasters. To be completely honest, I never thought I would get a distinguished Toastmaster because I never wanted to be a leader. But now I am in a situation where I'm just one award away. I just need my Advanced Communicator Silver and I guess and a big project. But that seems to be part of the silver. I don't know. Whatever I need to do this huge project that displays my leadership. But I never thought I would do that for many reasons. Number one, I never wanted to be a leader. Most times when I had to be a leader in my Toastmasters, I was more cajoled into doing it. But now I am ready to step up big time. Not only that, I also need to start my own club or coach a club, and I have an idea. I want to bring inspirational people and light workers together in a Toastmaster setting. I believe I got the location available, and I'm ready to start that club. Not only that, when I was talking about before I went off that train of thought, I became the public relations manager for the entire District 2, which is a huge undertaking. The more I'm looking into it, the bigger it actually is. All that it will entail. It is arguably the 4th biggest role in district leadership. And not only that, I'm going to be in a play, and I've never done that before, but it's a local play ran by Toastmasters, so I have to create my own costume, which is not my sphere of expertise right there. But it'll be a fun opportunity to stretch myself, especially since it's a non-speaking mime role, and I never thought of myself as a non-speaking mime type of person. But at the same time, it'll be a good way to practice that non-verbal communication that is important to be a speaker. So I'm looking about that as an opportunity. That is so many things to take on at once. And I remember the last time I took a lot of things on at once. It was about 4 years ago. Maybe 5, I believe it was 2013. I call that year my year of the great expansion and collapse. For you see, that was the first time I took on a big role in Toastmasters. I became what is known as a vice president of education, which for a club of around 30-something members, that is a huge undertaking as I am in charge of practically every meeting. And unfortunately, I took charge of every meeting and almost burned myself out. But not only that, I got a girlfriend, so I was expanding my personal life as well. Unfortunately, that ended during that time as well. So going through that and then becoming president after that. But the big thing was releasing my book. Joyous Expansion, Unleashing Your Passions to Lead an Inspired Life. Me in a nutshell. Me being vulnerable. Me putting my heart out there. I was very caught up in action. I gotta take action. I've been living this personal development life for so long. It's time for me to show their fruits to my labor. You know, fruit tree. growing the tree, and now I want to eat that delicious fruit of success. And it's all going to start when I release my book. But when you are a person whose biggest fear is vulnerability and being vulnerable and being seen, the amount of being seen it takes to create a good book, the amount of people had to ask for reviews, for those little reviews that you see at the beginning and on the back of a book. This book was awesome, blah, 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 sending it out there. And the biggest thing was the book release party. The book coach I hired said he had 2 types of clients, successful ones and unsuccessful. And what split them apart was the successful ones did a book release party. So I had to ask everyone, hire everything, do everything. I really should have done that as my high performance leadership, which is the name of that project, as I just remembered. Oh, mind. So asking everyone and throwing this big party to myself, doing my 50-minute keynote speech, which is a combination of all my speeches through Toastmasters that are my favorite, peppering certain things in, because that's one of the beauties of Toastmasters. You can create a keynote speech in chunks, and being very proud of what I accomplished, everyone telling me what I did and how everything worked well, and it's finally over. Book is released, coasting as president, which is the easiest of the Toastmaster jobs, because you're just in charge of people. You don't really have to do anything. You just have to make sure everyone is doing their job and lead every. And I get to start every meeting or run meetings, or things go through me, but I generally hand it off. Being president's simple, even though it is leadership. It's just not as hard in comparison to vice president of education, where I did practically 8 jobs. Anyway, I digress. I was done. But unfortunately, I did not take it upon myself to use that as a growth opportunity. I mostly noticed myself as done and thinking what I needed to do next. And what I needed to do next was do more events, and the thought scared me. And of course, that led me to eat more food and more food and more food and more food. Before I was going out with what I called my fairy, I weighed roughly 315 pounds, which is not good. But it was good for me at the time. Unfortunately, once I did my book release party, I ballooned up to 350 with the stress pushing me and just stress eating. But then, once all that pressure was off, I can still feel the stress because it was vulnerable. Releasing that book was vulnerable. Getting people to do that is vulnerable. Reaching out is vulnerable. And not seeing the success I wanted as well. Not all of a sudden. They say writing a book is hard, but promoting a book is even harder. I was just not prepared for that toll it would take upon me. I set my intentions. I moved myself forward. I took everything I learned, and all that did was make sure I didn't go off the deep end, but unfortunately, I just did not notice. It's one of the benefits of hiring a coach. I highly suggest doing that. That was, if I think of one of my regrets, is not valuing the amount of money a coach costs, because the value is so much higher. Trying to go at it myself, a coach would have at least looked at me and said, Brett, you're eating yourself into oblivion. In fact, I didn't even notice that until one December morning. I was thinking about somebody I loved. They were having problems with alcohol. I gave myself the thought, if only this person that I loved would use alcohol for fun instead of using it as a crutch. And then a voice went off in the back of my head and said, you use food to hide. How are you any different? And in that moment, I realized, as I didn't even own a scale, because I probably weighed over 400 pounds, which is, dare I say, a lot. If you think 315 is a lot, and it is, I can tell you 400 pounds is immensely worse. Mostly because I do have a decent amount of muscle on my body. So I carry 315, and that's not pain, but at 400, walking 2 blocks would cause my back to seize up. And I didn't notice. That's what happened last time I stretched myself. That's what happened last time I took on as many things as I am doing right now. Everything I learned from when I wrote my first book was valuable. I used to be a very depressed human being. I used to be very sad until I went the personal development route and learned so much. So I am very proud of Joyous Expansion, Unleashing Your Passion to Lead and Inspire Life. It is a great book that could help you. And I'm proud of what I accomplished, but unfortunately I made a mistake. I did not take all of my advice, especially the illusion of being done. I thought I needed to go into action, but what I really needed to go was into mindset. And develop the mindset to live my dreams. My book, not to become successful, but to develop the mindset of someone who can be vulnerable. Book release party, develop the mindset of asking people for help, to celebrate my accomplishments, to become somebody who can grow from each step. That was my biggest error, is stopping the mindset. So, as I mentioned in my podcast before, it really hit home when I hit bankruptcy. About a year after that revelation, I lost my full-time position. I couldn't find a job. And the jobs I found I couldn't keep because I was just stuck in this prison of anxiety. But I was spiritual, so I was able to cover it up with my spirituality. And I was more happier than I would have been than before, though. So I'm not taking that away. But at the same time, I didn't notice until another night, I lost my job. Trump was elected. And I just finished my bankruptcy. I felt at my lowest low. And I noticed what got me here. It's not just food for escaping, it's your anxieties, man. You allowed your anxiety to crush you and get you into this situation because honestly, that bankruptcy still might not have been avoided, but if I didn't use my anxiety of spending a little bit more money than I should, making it more difficult. In fact, the more I look at my life, the more I realize my anxiety has never helped me. Yes, fear is important. It's a very important emotion. But it was my anxiety that stopped me. And so I've just dedicated my life to getting myself back on track and recognizing the fact that I need to develop the ultimate mindset, which is why I started this podcast, which is why I'm writing my next book on developing the ultimate mindset for business entrepreneurs who also have strong anxieties. That's why I wrote the free ebook on my website. The thing is the people who are like me, who want to make great differences in the world, who this is my passion. This is what I love. I love this. And it's what I go through that determines what I teach. And that leads me to the next interviewee, Julie Grimm. What an amazing interview that was. She is so smart and clear and really talks about living your dreams. I'm very excited to share this podcast with you. I'm really happy it's one of my first 3 that I'm releasing at once. So let me tell you something about Julie. Julie Grimm is the founder of Ohmbaby and helps individuals gain clarity about what they truly desire in life. She's a trained neuroscientist and also a healer, cleric shaman, and novice ritual master in the lineage of King Salomon. Using a unique blend of meditation, energy healing, and coaching, she helps clients break free from the cycles of negativity and courageously go after what they want. And now, here's the interview with Julie Grimm. Hello, Julie. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be on it. I've never actually met you in person, but I'm happy to meet you today.
Yeah, it's the first time we talked. I've been friends with you on Facebook for a while, and I've really enjoyed your posts. You're a very inspiring presence.
Thanks. It's been really fun having you as my Facebook friend, and I would like to say you sound a little bit different than I expected.
Well, I hope that's in a good way.
It is.
Tell me a little something about yourself. What do you like? What you do?
Yeah, well, I guess that's in part how we know each other. So I'm a transformational healer, and I support people who are looking to find freedom from, be it negativity or limiting thoughts or belief or patterns that they can't really feel like that they can escape on their own. And I support them through meditation, through one-on-one coaching, and then through energy healing to really break free from all of those weights, like baggage. I work with a lot of people that have done work on themselves, be it through therapy or any sort of self-taught, reading books, but for whatever reason, they can't really let go of that final piece. And I find that the methods that I use really support them in doing that.
That is really cool. What got you into that work?
Yeah, so I think probably most people that are in the healing field, you get into it by first doing that work on yourself. So I actually have a master's in neurobiology and was working in a biotech company, believe it or not, a few years ago, and felt really dissatisfied. I actually felt that I was in a prison of my own life, of my own creation, that I didn't know how to get out of. And it was like clear to me that I was creating it. Some people, they might still cast that blame outside of them, but it was like, okay, no, I've done this, but I don't know how to get out of this. And I don't even know like what the first steps are to get out of this. In part, my identity was really wrapped up in being a scientist. So I think that really helped to cage me in, because it was like, I don't even know who I am outside of this prison. And I found somebody, my spiritual guide, who not only taught me meditation, but also did this one-on-one healing session called Life Activation. And that really supported me in discovering day to day in my own life, new ways to express myself, new ways to be, ways that maybe I had as a child, but had forgotten or closed the door on or, dismissed. And as I slowly reclaimed those little bits and pieces, I found that I had more joy. And eventually that led me to want to bring it to others and created my own business.
That is really cool. I really like the idea. I don't want to say idea, but the story between you were a scientist, something you studied, and then you transitioned over. What were your negative thoughts behind that? Did you have any fears?
I remember so clearly. This is why when you mentioned your podcast, I was really excited, because like the moment that I started to create my business, I also discovered my most paralyzing fears. It was like I had to send an email. I remember very vividly. So I kind of created my business while I was working part-time, and which I think a lot of people do. And I was listening to this free online summit that this woman was hosting that was all about becoming your own businesswoman, whatever. So I was listening to all these inspirational talks, and I was like, I gotta do it. I got my idea. And I wasn't even starting like, here's my business, right? Because that still didn't feel that my doors were still closed to that possibility. So it was like, I'll offer this to kind of friends and family or, my Facebook group, for example, for free and see if it works. Not the energy healing that I had already been doing for about a year, but specifically this one-on-one coaching program that I created to support people basically to live the life of their dreams. And I was like, I don't really know if I can do this, so I'll offer it to people for free. And part of that was there was a space near me that I wanted to use for a workshop that would have been kind of the platform for all of that. And it was an email. And I was sitting there and I had the feeling like if I sent that email, I would die. And like I had written the email and my fingers on send. And it was a wall of fear, like the most fear I can remember ever feeling at once. Like since then, there's been moments where I have panic attack kind of things or like chronic low level fear, kind of anxiety stuff. But this was like, if I could ever remember a day that I was most afraid, I think it was this day. And all I was doing was sending an email to see if I could host a workshop totally for free, basically to friends and family. But that was a huge wall for me. And I just was like, I had written it down on my calendar that I will do it by this day. And of course, I did it at the last hour of that day. And something inside me was like, you must push this button. And I pushed send. And afterwards, of course, I was like, oh, that was so easy. That was nothing. Why didn't I push send earlier? All of that stuff. But I very vividly remember really that turning point for me in saying, okay, I'm going to take my ideas seriously and I'm going to act on them and take that first step. Brought up huge fears.
Isn't it crazy how much we imagine problems happening in our lives? Especially what it sounds like to me is you're thinking that extreme fear die thinking of all those negative things that can happen by just putting yourself out there, and doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, of course it doesn't happen. Since then I've gotten a little bit more refined in the fears. Like I hear them more clearly. That was just like paralyzing fear, like die. It was like, I will die. And now there's like, okay, I'm afraid of being big. I'm afraid of growing. I'm afraid of being seen. I'm afraid of succeeding. I'm afraid of failing. Like I get a little bit more clarity. But underneath all of it, it's like when the fear comes, it feels like you will die. There's this feeling of like, I'm walking into a death trap right now, and everything inside of me is saying, do not do the thing.
It's sort of interesting to hear you talk about the fear of success, because I know some people, I've had that fear as well. And that fear, when you think about it logically, it almost doesn't make sense. I'm afraid of being successful and lots of money and rich. Can you talk a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So, something that's really supported me in creating my own business was actually getting help. And so I've had a few coaches now and mentors. And when that started to first come up for me, I was getting coaching around it and really saw clearly the attachments and associations I had with being successful or being rich, for example. Those are both fears of mine. And it's like starting to untangle a story that you've created around what that means. So, for example, you're not necessarily afraid of being successful. You're afraid of what that means to you. So questions you can ask yourself are like, well, what is it? What would happen if I were successful? What would that mean? And it might mean I have tons of responsibility. It might mean that I'm more visible, so more people are going to critique me and judge me. It might mean like my relationships with friends and family need to shift. There's ways that we almost attach things that we perceive as negative to these extremely positive events in our life.
What were some of your fears?
So specifically around having more money, it was like that would actually take more work and more organization on my part that I felt I was capable of, which is almost comical because if anybody listening has ever not had money, you need to be so organized. You need to be like, okay, I have enough for this. And then budgeting is a huge thing. Whereas when you're overflowing in abundance, obviously it's still good to be organized, but you don't have to be, right? You're not going to like overdraw your account if you spend a little bit more here or there. And so, starting to look and zoom in and then be able to dismantle things that are actually just lies. Because usually there's a lie in there. When you have that intense fear, it's trying to protect you from something, but it's usually based on a falsehood, something that is not actually true.
One thing that stood out to me of what you just said a few minutes ago is also asking for help. I know one thing that's held me back a lot is asking others for help. There's just this block of being vulnerable. And also this idea, this almost American ideal that the Lone Ranger goes out on his own, the self-made person goes out and becomes a billionaire.
Oh my gosh, I hear you so much. Asking for help has been a huge block for me, a huge obstacle. Like right now, I think I'm the most supported I've ever been in my entire life. I have a spiritual guide who's kind of like a mentor and more all things spiritual. I have a coach, I have a therapist, and then I have a supportive network of humans around me. And I've never had all of that before. And the only reason I do, honestly, is because if I didn't, I would not succeed. There's just no way that I could possibly do it alone. And I tried that. I tried that so hard. Like, I still try that. I fight help all the time, tooth and nail. But there is this humbling process. Starting your own business is incredibly humbling. And one of the first things you learn is there is no way I can do this alone. And frankly, like, we're not supposed to do it alone, right? Just what you said, that's a myth. And maybe it's in part like exacerbated by American culture, or maybe even the ways that we're raised in our family units or, media, definitely social media. We only see the person. We don't see their support network. We don't see everything that happened to them behind the scenes to get them. We only see their success. And then we think, oh, I'll just do everything alone and have that same success. And it's like, no, they had so much going on behind the scenes. So many people in the wings helping and supporting them and everything else. But yeah, for me, looking closely, and I would say that for you too, or anybody listening, what specifically, and it's going to be a fear, what are you afraid asking for help means about you? For me, I was afraid, and I'm still in some ways overcoming this now, maybe on deeper levels, that asking for help means that I'm weak, that I'm greedy. Like if I need somebody's time, I'm a burden to them. I think that that's a fairly common one. But obviously each of us have our own different flavors. So asking yourself, like, what am I afraid asking for help means about me? Might be useful in starting to find that falsehood that your fear is based on and then letting go of it.
Yeah, I definitely have that burden one. If I ask someone, I would be putting them out there. I think some of that stems from my mom not really being embarrassed about being poor when I was young.
One big thing that helped me shift that burden one specifically is think about how much you enjoy giving help to other people when you authentically feel that you want to, right? Like there's obviously times that sometimes we say yes to people and we feel that resentment. Okay, that's on us. We probably shouldn't have said yes. But those times when you help somebody and you feel so good that you were able to help them, right? I'm like literally in a business of helping people, and yet I don't want to ask for help. Think about how much joy and satisfaction it gives me, how much sense of purpose and meaning it gives me to support people when they ask for help. And then meanwhile, I'm like, oh, if I ask for help, I'm a burden. Well, I don't think my clients are burdens.
Exactly.
Right? But so anyway, just like starting to look more closely at what are those stories and then the truthhood or the falsehoods that they're based on.
It's also like an energy exchange, so both giving and receiving at the same time, the importance of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And something too, which then also links into finances, I think, which are a huge source of fear for most humans, is that there's actually a synergistic effect. Like it's not just energy exchange, there's also an amplification. Like when I come together and I work and I get supported by my coach, not only are they able to receive some money from it, and I'm able to receive a lot of clarity and support, but then we're both able to go do more, better, and greater things out in the world. So it's not even like one-to-one that there's some status quo that's now been preserved, which is how I used to think of energy exchange. But it's an amplification. Like now the world is literally better because we exchanged energy. And I almost think of that, this is maybe too like meta or going off into my spiritual land, but when you make a baby, right, there's an exchange of energy, but you create a whole new human being, OMG. And it's kind of like that, when we allow ourselves to be supported in the way that we really need to be, and we allow another really to give in the way that they also maybe feel called to give, we don't just have a one-to-one, we're actually creating something far better and far greater. That's my little energy exchange rant.
That is great. I never really thought about it that way. I love the idea of just energy amplifying with that exchange, especially when you're doing it in such a way from the heart. That's such a great way of looking at it.
Yeah. And then it's also, energy exchange that can sometimes be like, oh, so, you give me X amount of money and I give you this, and it's very transactional. When you think of it in the more amplification way, it's like it no longer is transactional. It's really that the two of you have come together and you've decided we're going to make things better for me and better for you at the same time, which is obviously touching a lot of lives and benefiting a huge number of people.
Yeah, I love it. See, that's why I started this podcast, so I can listen and learn all these cool things.
Yeah, maybe, and support your listener base, who then are going to go on and do great things.
Yeah. I love it. In starting your business and going through that, did you have any fraud factor feelings?
Like imposter syndrome?
Yeah, imposter syndrome as well.
Yeah, certainly, especially in the beginning, in part because, so the energy healing work that I do is like in a 3,000-year-old lineage. It's super sacred and it's like the special recipe. And I went to a special training and I go every year to get retrained. So there I kind of felt solid. I was like, not a fraud here. But when I created my own program that I did with people, I felt like, oh, I just created this thing. Who am I to create something and then ask people to pay me for it, right? And so there I started to really feel like I'm not good enough. Other people could do it better, yada, 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 like that whole inner self-talk. And it's interesting because, so I'm always trying to advance myself and seek further training and grow, both for myself, but then also to better support the people that I work with. And so part of that, it's not all bad, honestly, to hear that, not necessarily in the super negative light or the critical light, but to hear I can be better, because it's true. I can always be better. And there are always things that I would like to do both for myself and then also, to better my business, other trainings and refine my skills. But then there's also the realization or the affirmation, but starting right here, right now is okay. And I can start right here, right now, and build. And there's always those clients who are going to meet you where you're at. Like the clients that I worked with when I first started aren't the clients that I'm working with now. And there's a way that we've both grown. And that's part of it, right? Like asking yourself to be perfect or to know the ropes from day one isn't realistic. And you can't think yourself into knowing the ropes. You can only do it You can only act. You can only gather that body of experience through physically going out and doing the work and refining it that way. So, sitting in your bedroom psychoanalyzing or overanalyzing, overthinking yourself into doing it right isn't going to work. You have to go out there and do it.
That makes perfect sense. I have a black belt in sitting in my home and analyzing. The analysis of paralysis.
Well, maybe it's time to trade that in for a white belt of going out there and kicking butt on the streets.
To be honest, that's one reason why I started this podcast. I had the idea, I think about a month ago, and I'm like, all right, June 1st, I'm going to set this date. I'm going to post something out there and see if anyone's willing to be interviewed. And here we are.
That's awesome. Yeah. And setting that date is really helpful in supporting yourself to move through those obstacles. Because like you were saying, that might have been when we weren't recording, but like, if I don't do it by nighttime, I'm going to have 1,000,010 excuses. And it's that same thing. Like, if you don't set your date, you're just going to excuse yourself away until, oops, I just forgot about that thing that I wanted to do. And now it's been 3 years later.
Yeah, I've known that one very well. In your work with people, how do you help them get over their fears?
One major thing that I do with people, which is kind of like, I guess, my philosophy on life also, is there's a certain amount of energy that needs to be focused on the fear, right? You got to identify it, you got to look at it, but don't look too far into that fear and don't just stand there all day. That's like the Nietzsche quote, right? He who looks into the dark, remember that the dark looks back at you. That's part of the paralysis, right? You're like looking at all your shadow stuff and then you kind of get stuck there being like, wow, I'm a crappy person. And it's this effect that just sort of amplifies. I like to help people remember all their good stuff. So imagine that you are inspired, you have this idea, you want to take action on it. Your fears start to come up. Your ability to move through that fear is directly related to your connection to inspiration, to your greater vision, and to the power and beauty that will bring both to your life and to other people's lives. If you're not connected to that, chances are it will be very difficult, if not impossible, for you to move through fear, right? The fear is kind of like a gateway. It's a doorway. It's a threshold. And it takes a lot of energy to pass through that threshold. If you don't have that energy from joy, excitement, inspiration, passion, that fuel, you're not going to make it. So I help people connect with whatever that joy, passion, creativity, inspiration, that spark, in order that when they are at the threshold, they can make it through. So the energy healing is really about that fuel. It's helping people to reconnect with who they are at their core, what their heart's desire truly is, and getting them energized and activated. It's called a life activation, activated so that they can move through resistance more easily. Then the coaching sessions are helpful to get clarity on the fears and work through all those falsehoods that we talked about before. But, I really focus on getting people lit up first and foremost, because I see a lot of programs that focus so much on fear. And I do think it can just be overwhelming if you look at that too long.
Agreed. You don't want to just look at the fear. The joy part's important as well.
Yeah, the joy part, the vision, the creativity, and, finding really small things to get yourself flowing every single day, reconnecting to that energy of inspiration on a daily basis, basically helping yourself become a container for that fuel so that when you meet this threshold, you have the energy to pass through it.
That is so cool. How long have you been doing this?
So I've been doing it for 2 years full time. I was doing the energy healing specifically for about a year before I launched my own business.
That is so neat. I also see that you do workshops as well.
Yeah, I do workshops. So I used to be a scientist. I do energy healing now, which is like, very, I don't think that they're different worlds, but for many scientists, they would be like, what happened? And I love connecting with people that might not otherwise feel a connection to energy work. So doing workshops in corporate offices, I also do a little bit within the school system, is really satisfying for me because I feel like I'm able to reach people that maybe wouldn't be drawn to a meditation class or wouldn't be drawn to check out this energy healer, or even maybe coaching. Even if it's just all that they get is the workshop, touch base with them a little bit, almost planting that seed. That's really what it is. This is here, this is possible, seed planted. Maybe it takes them 5 years. I don't know. The world is definitely changing each and every day. But getting people that are, like you mentioned, feeling afraid, feeling isolated by that fear, feeling like they're overthinking and they don't know where to go, getting them just that first touch point of like things can change. And maybe it doesn't exist in what you would consider the normal practices, maybe like therapy or whatever else, but maybe it exists in these other alternatives that you haven't yet explored. And that for me was definitely true, right? I was a pretty rigid, dogmatic scientist, unless all of those really, I didn't mention this, but I felt like my life was a prison, and at the same time it was falling apart, and I was trying desperately to hold on to the things that I wanted, but they were like hurting me more and more and more. Like, for example, a relationship, also my job. If I hadn't experienced that pain, I was depressed, I was just like really unhappy, I probably wouldn't have asked for help, and I definitely wouldn't have asked my meditation teacher. So it almost took me getting to that really low point to be humbled enough, to be desperate enough, to be concerned enough about my own well-being to seek out alternatives and seek them out in areas that I might not have typically looked before. And I kind of feel like if I can be that bridge to whoever that person is, I want to show up. And so my workshops are really about that. There's obviously the content of my workshops, and I just gave one about how to be a Jedi at work, where I basically just looked at Yoda puns all day, which was really lovely and beautiful. I'm actually doing much more work there, which is really at the core of why I do them at all.
More work on Yoda puns?
More work on planting seeds for people that need help, but aren't willing to ask help and aren't willing to go to energy healing yet for help. But they're in that stuck spot. They don't know what they need to get out. And maybe they've tried Western medicine. Maybe they're on antidepressants, or, they're taking some sort of medication. Maybe they're even going to a talk therapist, but they're not getting the results that they know that they can. And they're feeling at a loss, those people.
Wow. That is certainly cool. I've been into that stuck place. In fact, getting into that stuck place is how I actually started my meditation practice. Very bad at meditating until I declared bankruptcy. Then I became awesome at it.
Wow. That's a hard thing to do. Holy crap.
Yes. Wasn't the most fun thing to do, but the meditating every morning has definitely been helpful.
Yeah, that's what I mean also about falsehood. Like, meditation teaches us that we are not our external surroundings. So we'll have like the emotional breakdowns that happen around money, for example, or around like, status changing, whatever kind of things that we associate with whatever that negative external reality is, like going bankrupt, right? Like maybe there's shame, maybe there's embarrassment, and then obviously like the stress of just not having money at all. But meditation helps you realize, like, I am actually not that. This is happening in my life, but I'm separate from that. And my worth is separate from that. And if I do feel ashamed, like, I can let that go. It's a choice. I don't have to feel ashamed about that. At least that's how it works for me. So I think meditation is a really powerful tool. Obviously, I mentioned I use it with my clients, and yeah, I love it. Personally, for myself, it's been huge to navigate those ups and downs and not get so pulled in the waves of the ups and the downs.
Well, that is so cool. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on. We're towards the end of our time. One thing I like to ask everybody who comes on here is to give 1 minute of motivation, something to really leave the audience with.
So my minute of motivation would really be, I think one of the themes that we've talked about is asking for help and seeing yourself as part of a greater whole. Fear breeds and thrives when we feel isolated. So knowing that you're not alone, that what you're meant to do here in this world is meant to serve other people in a much bigger way, and that as you ask and reach and get support in doing that, you're able to influence and better the lives, not just of your own life, but all the people around you. Starting to be able to reconnect with that sense of, I'm not alone. The fears that I face are not just mine. Other people have these same fears too. It's okay to ask for support. It's okay to have that connection. It's good to have that connection, and it's good to have that support, and starting to reframe those understandings of what it means to get help and what it means to be a member of society, a part of a community, that you don't just have to have your tough guy mask on or to armor through it or to push through hard times, but you're allowed to be vulnerable. It's allowed to be super messy. In fact, it's probably going to be super messy, and that's okay. And know that it's not just super messy for you, but it's super messy for pretty much anybody who's willing to face their fears. It really is brave acts, courageous acts that the world desperately needs, that people desperately need to be reminded of, that it's possible to be courageous and it's possible to take action on your dreams.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I find your message to be very inspiring, especially to go from a situation where you're pragmatic and a scientist and to listen to your purpose and move towards something that maybe the outside world would be like, what? What is she doing? Why are you doing that? And to have that courage to both go for your dreams as well as the ability to ask for help and to push through your fears and helping other people push through their fears. It's been very much fun being part of this interview and listening to your story. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing it.
Thanks, Brett. It was really great. Thank you so much for having me. Really, really had a good time.
It's my pleasure. And that, my folks, is Julie Grimm's interview. I absolutely love this interview. The points she put on are really poignant. I enjoy the fact of talking about asking for help. That is such an important part of being successful. And if I were to think of any reason why my last 10 years of being an entrepreneur and going out there, and what really has held me back mostly, it's not asking for help, not hiring a coach, not going to therapy, trying to do everything myself. I mean, there's a vulnerability to asking for help that exists out there. And it's something to consider, to let go of. And the best part about asking for help is, as Julie was talking about, is the fact that it is an energy enhancer. I used to think of it until this interview itself as a one-on-one exchange. Here I am hiring somebody. Every time I hire a coach or a energy healer or anything of that nature. Anytime when I am supporting somebody who is living their dream and living their passion. This isn't just hiring a coach. This is when I buy those hot sauces at the farmer's market or when I go to the fairs and buy the delicious, delicious soaps. I love handmade soaps. Every time I spend my money getting something that brings me extra joy than something I can get at the store, every time I do that, I am allowing someone to live their passion, to live their dream. So think of that next time you put it out there. Or next time you want to buy something, maybe it's worth the extra money to spend it on somebody who is making it their passion rather than their profit. But I also loved how she talked about fear and getting over fear and working on the positives as well. So many things resonated me in that interview thinking about my life. So I'm asking you this. What was your major takeaway from the interview with Julie? If you have a journal or ability to journal, write it down. I mean, that is a great way to soak in lessons, is to write it down. There's something about taking something from your brain and putting it on paper. Of course, you want to take action when it comes to living your dream. So not only do you want to write it down, you want to take an action and do something. So what can you take from Julie's interview? Who can you get to support you? Maybe you don't have the money right now, but maybe there's somebody out there who's willing to support you in an exchange. How can you find help? How can you get a mentor? Of course, Julie is available because Julie offers meditation and one-on-one coaching at any distance. But if you are in the Boston area, feel free to reach out for personal consultation. Otherwise, connect with her online at www.ohmbaby.com. That is OHMBABY.com to see how Julie can help you transform your life. And speaking of transforming your life, I thank you for listening to today's podcast. That is my third podcast done. I am so happy that I completed it. I have, over 2 weeks until I'm releasing this. So I'm actually doing something early. That's crazy. And I've reached my goal of 8 interviews before that. So I'm riding high right now. This has been Joy and Ease. Joy and Ease. So if you enjoyed this podcast, I ask you to, if you're listening to it on anything, like and subscribe to it. Write a review that helps more people see it. Share it with your friends if you're so inclined. If you're like, man, this is awesome. I would like to support Brett somehow. Go to pod.joyousexpansion.com and click on one of those delicious affiliate links. Leave a comment. Also, if you want to send me an email of what you thought about today's interview, maybe I'll start reading emails if I get them. You can send it to me at Brett Dupree at joyousexpansion.com. That is 2 T's, 2 E's, BRETTDUPREE at joyousexpansion.com. You can find more information about me at joyousexpansion.com. I'm at Twitter and Instagram at joyousexpansion. I'm at Facebook at Increase Your Joy. I also have a group for people just like you who are trying to experience great things by feeling social anxiety. You'll find that at pod.joyousexpansion.com where I have a link. Thank you again so much for listening to my podcast. And I remind you again to be love, to be joy, to be awesome. Now play my jingle.
JoyousExpansion.com. JoyousExpansion.com. Come and say hello to Brett Dupree. He is an inspirational life coach. Good for you and good for me. He turned my life from grey to blue. I'm sure he'll do the same for you. Get in touch and you'll see your life will change dramatically. JoyousExpansion.com. JoyousExpansion.com. Yeah.